Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives, and they're now using the power of their voice, or podium, to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good, old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Joshua Banbury. Joshua is a Texas-born vocalist and librettist, gaining global attention for his work in opera, jazz, and folk music. He is currently a librettist in residence at the American Lyric Theater in New York City and in residence at Soho House Austin with his jazz trio. Joshua's works have been presented by and at Lincoln Center, the American Lyric Theater, Washington National Opera, the Kennedy Center, Fort Worth Opera, Really Spicy Opera, and National Sawdust. In 2022, the Washington National Opera and the Kennedy Center will premiere his original opera, The Burning Bush, written in collaboration with Jasmine Barnes and the National Symphony Orchestra. Joshua has recently received writing and performance commissions from the New York Philharmonic, the National Black Theater, the New School, the National Young Arts Foundation, Soho House Austin, and the Coalition for African Americans in the Performing Arts. He has been engaged as a soloist in performances at and with the New York Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, National Sawdust, Glimmer Glass Opera, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and the Kennedy Center. Joshua is a proud graduate of the New School and the Austin School for Performing and Visual Arts. Joshua, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for making time today. I know you're quite busy writing your own work, performing. So I know the energy and focus that takes to do that. So thank you for making time for this today.
I appreciate you for making time for me as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. I came across your music on Instagram and I was immediately intrigued by your voice and your stage presence and the breadth of work that you are creating. I really was captured by your video of Billy Strayhorn's Lush Life. You recorded, I think 3 years ago, you were with the pianist Rasan Hakim and the cellist Mel Greenwich.
Yes, yeah.
Your interpretation was stunning, was haunting. It was completely dropped in. So I want to know what drew you to that song and that arrangement in particular.
Thanks, first of all, for noticing that, because that was sort of a, I wouldn't call it random, but I had just moved to New York when I recorded that video in 2018. And I left Baltimore to finish my studies in New York at the New School. And I went to New York with the intention of trying to figure out how to be a jazz singer. And I think I made that video within a week of me moving there. We recorded that in Brooklyn. And Rasan was really kind to me. Like he brought in a few different musicians for us to work with. And that was the first project that we did. I also chose it just because Billy Strayhorn is like an idol of mine. And I really try my best to share his work in what I do, because I just hate how, I don't know if you know anything about his story, obviously, probably, but you know, he was overlooked during his time. So that was my initial reason for choosing the song. And secondly, I was going through like a difficult separation at the time. So that song is like quintessential, you know, yeah. It's definitely like all of the feelings that you go through when you're like separating or dealing with the loss of someone that used to be like very close to you.
I play it on the soprano saxophone, and it's a really difficult song to play because it really is two stories combined into one.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to really invest in the emotional journey of that song to make the music work because it's so complex rhythmically. Tonally, the tone of the song is incredibly complex. And so
It's almost like two different songs.
It's two different songs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that you describing straight horn as being overlooked is quite appropriate to
Mm-hmm.
and sort of personified in that song.
Mm. Yes. And I think it's even more interesting that like he wrote that at 19, 18 or 19. And he hadn't even really seen the world at that point. And I wonder if he had even fallen in love and had the chance to be someone who had visited gay places and is now, you know, just sitting alone at a bar. I'm like, how does a teenager sort of, I don't know, talk about chapters in our lives that usually happen later on in our lives? There's so much maturity in the writing. It's so impressive to me.
And it's, you know, and it's a song that resonates because every singer worth their salt tries to sing that song.
Oh, I thought you were going to say every singer worth their salt has visited gay places and is now like, you know, heartbroken.
No.
Yeah, okay. And
No,
they dined and okay.
Maybe they have. I don't know. I don't know. But but they've all you hear some, you know, Nancy Wilson had a great rendition of that song, a great version of that song, and it's just a beautiful song. And I was just struck that you were singing it and the way that you were singing it. I think one thing that drew me to the song, Joshua, was the tone, the quality, the timbre of your voice. And the first thing I was curious about is the sound that you make. That sound, that is your voice, that is so distinctly your voice. Is that you, or was that something you learned to manufacture? Because it's quite an unusual, emotionally evocative voice.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think the right answer is that the foundation of my timbre or my technique is like classical singing. So I think I start from there with making sure that like my vowels are even open and round and tall, which can really change the way that your singing comes across. I'm really interested in like vowels and diction. It can do a lot with like even placing you in a certain time period. So I think I started with classical singing and like singing art songs and then transitioning into jazz and listening to people like Johnny Hartman, listening to singers like Herb Jeffries, who else? Of course, Billy Eckstine. And when I first heard Billy singing, and apparently he taught Sarah Vaughan a lot of what she knows about singing. When she was a teenager, he hired her to sing in his big band. But his approach to singing is just so clean. And it sounded like almost theatrical, but his phrasing was also like very hip and swinging. But it was full singing as well. He wasn't singing off the breath in a way that sort of Billie Holiday does. Billie like hardly sings, but Billie Eckstine really sings like on the voice, and it's really supported all the way through. So I think I got really excited when I first started exploring his music because I realized that it was possible to take this really enormous sound that I learned to make. Not, I would say enormous, but just, you know, I'm learning to sing in a large acoustic space and bringing that to jazz. I didn't know if it was possible, but studying him and like, and then Johnny, later on I studied Johnny, and he was very known for easy singing, very, very light. And as I've gotten older in the past like year and a half, I've taken more inspiration from his singing. Because that's, I think, the thing that I'm most self-conscious about is I really want to approach the form with the respect that it deserves in terms of like honoring the people who have contributed to the form, or the, yeah. So I don't want to approach it like, I don't want to sing a jazz standard the way an opera singer would, just kind of like billowing through it the whole time. And so I think that's kind of how I've gotten over time the sound, if that makes any sense. Kind of just slowly chiseling each world, until they like come into one.
It does make sense. And when you reference Johnny Hartman, I can hear that in your voice. And I think your voice sits in the same range as Johnny Hartman, which I think he had a very unusual range of voice, because so often musically people tend to be attuned to the tenor voice in men, and we sort of highlight that. But when you really get those rich baritones and bass voices, and I know those terms are quite fluid for singers, but when you sing, I hear echoes of Johnny Hartman in your voice for sure.
Thank you. That reminds me, I actually have one more, and I always forget to say this as a reference, but in the past actually around the time that I moved to New York, I started studying Carnatic singing, or Hindustani singing, and not in any serious way. I'm still most certainly a novice, but I started working with a singer based in Brooklyn. Her name is Rumpa Mahadevan, and she's a Carnatic singer. She's leading sort of like a Renaissance, a Carnatic Renaissance right now in New York City. But she taught me to sing through some of the basic ragas, and I use a lot of like techniques in Indian. I try to use a lot of techniques in Indian singing, like gamakas. The idea that like there's always a note between each note, and like really thinking very intently about how you move between them. Indian singers focus a lot on little details like that, which has, I think, really opened my ear, and also given me that ease of singing that I'm looking for, and not being so shouty, opera-y.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sound, and it's a beautiful sound. So whatever you're doing, it's really effective, and it's not where a lot of singers are right now. A lot of singers, when they sing, are working with a lot of tension in the throat. They're belting very high, probably too high for what's proper for their vocal care. And they're creating a dramatic effect, no doubt.
Yes.
But I hear when you sing that you're keeping the track aligned, that you are breathing properly, that you're singing properly. And your reference to the creation of the vowel sound really helps carry the emotion of the song through. And maybe that's what you're doing. That's so interesting, is that the emotion is not the pyrotechnics of the voice. It's the meaning behind the words. It's the intention of the song that is really impacting the listener.
Definitely. It's the way that you say the words, even that can, even a thing like the fact that I'm from Texas changes the sound of my music severely. And I try not to, but I mean, that's something I have to be aware of, but that adds a completely different element to the message. And I think it's gotten me in a little bit of trouble, but I do approach most standards the way that I would an aria, in terms of interpreting the text as a character and finding a story to put that standard in. Like if I'm singing all or nothing at all, I have to like figure out like why was this written, and or who and who am I? Yeah, which is what they encourage us to do in school, I will say.
So you refer to yourself as a classically trained singer, but you don't refer to yourself as an opera singer. You refer to yourself as a singer, as a vocalist. Why is that distinction important for you?
It's important because, one, I really like the term vocal artist, because I really think it's an accurate description of the work that I'm trying to do. I'm really fascinated with just so many ways that I can communicate through just my voice alone, just across cultures, across decades there's just so many different ways to sing. I'll say it in a more simple way. And I'm always been really fascinated by that. And so I'm always approaching it like from the art of singing. And I think saying that I'm an opera singer is just so limiting, even just mostly for myself. And even from a marketing standpoint, like, it's, if I say that I'm that, it makes it difficult for me to even think about working with other artists or whatever. It puts me in a box, which.
So you were trained you took classical training. You were classically trained to sing. I want to know, and they're just in truthfulness, there are not a ton of Black opera singers out there. Did you face, what types of challenges did you face that you feel are unique to your experience as a Black classically trained opera singer?
Well, I think the first one is that I'm from Austin, which is, most people know, pretty, it's not a lot of Black people here, I'll say that. There's a lot of, white people, mostly white people. So when I was studying opera, first started as a teenager, I was under the assumption that there were no Black classical singers. And my collegiate path took me to 2 HBCUs where my entire world was just like turned upside down. And I met hundreds of Black opera singers. I think the thing is that there really are quite a few Black opera singers, and there's quite a few really excellent ones as well. And what I noticed was when I started doing semi-professional work towards the end of my degree, doing like summer programs for opera, I noticed that my friends that I just thought were so brilliant and that I thought were really pushing forward like the form, and they were not getting the opportunities to really showcase their brilliance and showcase all of the years of work that they put into all the nuances that go into being a classical singer. They were mostly subjected to doing like some sort of minstrelsy on stage. So I find that like the opportunities for Black opera singers, Black classical singers are limited, but that it really is only because of the repertoire. And of course, because, racism, but, that's also because of that. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's why I started writing libretto.
I was going to ask you, that was the impetus for you to start writing your own pieces.
Yes. Yes. Long story short, I've been writing since I was in 6th grade. Well, much earlier than that. I had my first play done like in 6th grade, and we were living in Atlanta. But I put that aside when I discovered I could sing when I was maybe 14 or 15. And I didn't touch it until I had that experience singing professionally. And I was like, maybe it's time I see if I can revive this gift and use it to help in any way that I can.
It's interesting, on the theater television side, people often pen work for themselves, because particularly people who don't feel that the establishment represents them as an artist. It's not unusual. And there are many people who have been able to successfully transition from performer to writer. You don't hear of that so often in the music world, particularly in classical music, because it's so defined by a very specific canon. But it's very interesting to see you trailblazing in that particular realm.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's what I think has been interesting so far in the journey has been because I've been, I guess, a professional librettist since I got into this residency earlier this fall. So it's been maybe six months. It has been interesting being a writer and a singer at the same time now. It's usually, before it's just been one or the other was my focus. Now they're both something that I'm trying to do at the same time. But they really inform each other so well. when I'm trying to work on jazz standards, it helps a lot with thinking like a librettist and vice versa.
You've said previously in other pieces that you've done or other interviews that you've done that folk music moves you in a very specific way, and I love that because again, you are not being pigeonholed into one specific genre of music. So I'm curious as to what folk music does to you and for you, and why it resonates so much for you.
Yeah. I found out last year that I'm a fifth or sixth generation Texan, that my family has been here in Texas for a long time, since before the Civil War. And so, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why I started being curious about my past and curious about my ancestors and the lives that they lived and the music that they sang, and, you know, the things that they had to figure out, and all of that. I felt like I also was at a point where when I first started digging into folk music, it was maybe 4 years ago now. I was living in Baltimore. I was the program I was in was really they weren't very encouraging of me trying repertoire that wasn't, you know, German lieder, you know, Italian art song, whatever. And I remember I had an argument with a teacher of mine where they basically said that folk singing is not high art. You can't sing something like that at a recital or whatever. But I think that's so silly. And that was another reason why I sort of started turning away from classical music, because I see there's so much virtuosity, obviously, in folk music, folk singing, and singing a cappella. Even something as simple as that is not as hard as it seems. But I'm also really drawn to folk music because of it's very narrative led. The narrative is like primary in most folk songs, and that is what fascinates me. Within a little 2-minute folk song, you can have a beginning, middle, end story about a character, where they went, who they were, where they lived. And I think that's just so cool. And it's just a sign of like the times where people had to learn how to entertain themselves without technology. They were just sitting on the porch, hanging out with your family. You got to figure out, like, you know, you're sitting around a fire drinking, like, what are you going to do? I guess make up songs and tell stories that are captivating to you and your family. And so I started collecting folk songs, starting with the Ritchie family in Kentucky. Jean Ritchie plays a dulcimer, and she comes from a long heritage of Appalachian dulcimer players in Kentucky. And that's where I got the majority of my repertoire for a folk EP that I recorded earlier this year. But and the other half of it was going back and looking at what sort of songs enslaved people were singing in Texas in the 19th century as well. And sorry, one last thing. I realized I didn't realize why I was doing it while I was doing it. I was just kind of like, I had an idea, but I wasn't entirely sure. But after the project was finished, I was certain that I felt like it was something I needed to do to pay tribute to ancestors of mine that maybe had the gift of song that never had the opportunity to use it. And no one ever, and I wouldn't say no one, but their voices weren't heard. There's the songs that they wrote weren't heard. That was a big epiphany that I had at the end. And that's why I'll continue to keep looking into folk music, especially regionally here in this area. Yeah.
Where do you draw your inspiration from for your music? Your palette is so broad. Just between the three that we've discussed, and I know there are more, but between folk and jazz and opera, where do you draw your inspiration?
A few different places. I'm generally led to one, and I've only come to slowly realize this after graduating college. I hadn't really had the space to do it when I was in school, but I think I'm inspired by anything that helps me to tell my own story, which is the main purpose of most of my art, simply to document my life story, first and foremost. And understanding that there is beauty and art in just telling my story as it was. So I'm drawn to anything, I'm inspired by anything that helps me to do that, or any songs that I feel like illuminate that. I'm also really inspired by visual art, surrealism, Leonor Carrion. I look at a lot of her paintings. And the entire surrealism movement is sort of how I try to approach my writing and my singing, in terms of that sort of abstraction. And I think my initial source of being a creative, where that came from, was growing up in a very small town here in Texas, and really not having many outlets to express my creativity or be amongst other creatives. So I became very good at doing that in my mind, and just, my imagination grew very big, I think, growing up in rural Texas. So that inspires me a lot as well. And I've been back here in Texas for the past few months. And it really does inspire me when I'm here, just the space alone.
I was in Mexico City not too long before the pandemic shut us down, and they were doing a retrospective of Leonor Carrington's work.
Oh my goodness.
In Mexico City at the Fine Arts Museum there. And
how was it?
It was spectacular. And she leaps off the canvas.
Yes.
And she
haunts you.
Haunts you. I mean, as your voice is haunting, her work is haunting, but she, her use of color, her use of texture, is quite evocative as well, I thought, when I saw her work in Mexico City. And it was the first time I had been exposed to her work.
Yes. And she was such a scholar too. That's what I found after digging more into her research. That her work is full of symbolism that can only be acquired by like researching what symbols belong to different cultures and like different time periods and eras and all that. That's what I try to do with my work. I'm really inspired by history as well. That's where I draw a lot of ancient cultures and things like that for my writing, especially.
I want to go back. We've talked about your present life and the work that you're doing and beginning to do. But I want to know, where did this gift come from? Did you know that you had this gift when you were growing up, and who nurtured the gift within you of singing and creation?
I didn't realize I didn't realize I could be good at singing until I was about 15. But I was always a performer from the age of like 4 or 5. And I will say my parents have encouraged me from the very beginning. And my father really, he really went out of his way to support me when I was in high school doing competitions. And I left the public school that I was attending to go to a new private school that opened up here in Austin, the Austin School for Performing and Visual Arts. And I went there, and I was able to get voice lessons almost every day for over a year. And that really set such a strong foundation for me as a singer. I think it was 17 to 18. So I've been very fortunate to be around people who saw me and also saw the potential in me as well. I have a very, very close-knit, supportive family.
I want to know what music gives you. When you sing, when you're writing, when you're creating, what are you getting from that?
I'm getting an atmosphere of my own to dwell in that I invite other people to dwell in as well, almost as a route of escapism, if that makes sense. That's a lot of the premise for my art. I really am fascinated with the idea of being able to create entire ecosystems just within my mind. And I think music is the best way to do that in terms of creating a space for people to dwell in. I think that's really powerful.
Do you think that music can heal and bring people together if they can dwell in that space?
Yeah. Yes, I know for sure that it can do that. And what I sorry, I lost my train of thought. I know that it can do that. But I also know that music can really be, yeah, a way to just transport us beyond like anything that like human beings can like really put words to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it just goes beyond. I think that's the best way to say. Music is one of the only ways that I know how to just go beyond myself.
It's interesting you say that. When I was studying to be an actor and we would approach a musical, we would always say that the reason people sing is because they have an experience, they're having an experience that cannot be expressed fully in regular dialogue. And that's when you elevate the emotion, you elevate the expression through song.
That's exactly it. It's exactly. I mean, that's what I was brought up. That's what my theater teachers told me all throughout college as well. I think that's spot on.
Are your parents musical as well?
Not really. Yes, you know what? They have great musical taste. My mom introduced me to jazz. They also have pretty eclectic taste, I will say, but they're not musicians formally. I as far as I know, I'm the only musician in my family on both sides.
It's unusual, though. You talk about so many narratives that we hear about musicians and actors and dancers. You hear the narrative sometimes that the parents are not supportive of that. And part of the journey to becoming an artist is how do you pursue those dreams, those ambitions without formal support from your family? So you seem to have the fortune of having parents who may not be natural musicians, but who have understood and nurtured that within you.
Yes. And I will say that it is difficult because we're both my parents and I are both learning, like, what does it mean to have a son that's in show business and like his life is like kind of a mess, like 80% of the year. But like we're both learning, but I will say, yeah, they've always supported me many ways, like financially or just like being there for me physically. I'm very, very lucky.
Does the success that you're having and the interest that you're having with such marquee venues like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, like the American Lyric Theater, like the Kennedy Center, does that help bolster their support for what you're doing? Because they see that people at very high levels are responding to the work that you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it goes, I think, with most parents. I think it comes out of fear for them because they just really want me to be able to sustain myself and be all right without them. And I think once these gigs like at that levels started coming in, I think they're increasingly less worried about me. I think that's really what it is. But I mean, even for myself, that just, it does make me feel that I'm getting closer to security as an artist, which sounds like an oxymoron, like putting the two words together, but you know, as close as one can get.
Have you ever doubted your talent?
Yes. I probably do it more than I should. yeah, and a lot of that has just come from I've bounced around so much within different mediums, and one day I'm a singer, and next day I'm a writer, and then I'm singing jazz, and I'm doing opera, now I'm doing folk. It's really played into a lot of imposter syndrome that I struggle with sometimes. But on a good day, I remind myself that they're all connected and they're all really the same thing.
What connects them? What connects the writing, the folk, the jazz, the opera? What connects?
Self-expression. That makes sense.
And what do you want to express? What do you want us as a listener to know about you, Joshua, the creator?
That I lived, that I was here, first of all. I think because I study a lot of ancient culture, I'm really so fascinated with the idea of like the Egyptian civilization lasted almost 4,000 years. And, you know, the United States hasn't even been around 400, I don't think, or 500. And just thinking about maybe 2,000 years into the Egyptian dynasty, I'm sure none of them ever thought that in another 2,000 years, Egypt would be no more, and that the world will continue spinning for tens and thousands of more years. And I'm so grateful that they, for whatever reason, had a culture of writing things, of transcription and writing things down. And I think that's so powerful. I really am motivated to, because I think when I started trying to figure out who I was as an adult and an artist, there were not a lot of places that I could go to find inspiration for stories like mine, who led lives like me. And it felt when I was younger at the time that, you know, there just wasn't another person like me who lived before. And, you know, but that's just simply not true. It's just about whose stories have been magnified and what stories have been put in front of me. And so I hope with my work to simply leave a legacy behind, for people to use as either, you know, a source of entertainment or a reference point for what it meant to be someone who lived in 2021 and was from a very small Texas town with a Confederate monument in it, who worked themselves all the way to, you know, singing at opera houses and things like that. I think that, yeah, I think, not I think, I know a story like that matters, as everyone's story matters. And that's why I really like singing and writing, because I just feel like it's the perfect vehicle for me to share my story.
You have talked about in the past, in other interviews that I listened to, that you have challenges around depression.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that music helps that for you? Or is the music a result of that?
Yeah, sometimes it's a result, especially in the past 2 years, and, you know, during the pandemic. Singing is pretty complicated for me, my relationship with singing. I don't do it as often as people probably think. And yeah, I get a lot of anxiety performing, and that's always kind of hindered me from doing more things live, but I'm getting more comfortable with myself and my body now, thankfully. But I think the depression comes from a lot of things that I'm always trying to balance with my mental health. And just also like some of the struggles that I deal with, like in terms of where I come from and being always feeling like very singular, and no matter like what space I'm in. That's kind of been a recurring theme as far as I can remember in my life. So solitude as well is something that like I'm always trying to figure out how to be content with. It's pretty beneficial for my work, but you know, being 25, 26, being alone also is not, I don't know, I feel like I shouldn't be as alone as I am, but A lot of that has to do with the pandemic. I will say I wasn't as depressed as I was before the pandemic started. A lot of the depressive episodes or whatnot started settling in more in 2020.
Do you think that perhaps that feeling, you said earlier that Strayhorn felt overlooked, perhaps isolated? Do you think that's why you so responded to the Lush Life songs? It's very reflective of where you might be in your own personal journey around your work, your mental health, etc.
Yeah. Yes. Most certainly. And even my own journey in like being a gay man who dates other gay men, like that has been quite a journey.
How so? How so?
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, not a lot, but everything you teach yourself for the most part. And when you come from a place like where I come from, it's really the adults that I knew, it felt like they were almost too ashamed to like tell me how to like, you know, how do you go on a date or how do I shave? Or it's like when they find out you're gay down here, at least 10, 15 years ago, like people just gave up on you. Or yeah, there were, of course, they bullied you, whatever. And then they kind of just gave up on you. So I just found myself having to, like many of gay men of color have to do, just sort of reacquainting themselves with the world. And there's a lot of hurdles that I had to overcome to get more familiar with like, what does it mean to be in love and show that in a healthy way. When it feels something, and often feels like a foreign concept to me.
The idea of showing love healthily, or
yeah. Of course, I know what it is, but I just know that like in my upbringing, like I didn't have a lot of genuine acceptance, which I think is true, is real love. So that's things like that really play into like how I feel each day. And if I'm feeling that way, for example, if things like that are like swirling in my head for a particular day, I don't want to sing, I don't know. I don't want to sing some little standard or something from our real book. I'm not in the mood. And typically I'll go and write. So that's something that I've had to, I'm still trying to figure out. My question for my teacher was, is singing for me or is it for them? And I've always been told it's for them. And sometimes I'm just like, but why? Like, why can't it also be for myself? I really need it for myself. I think both is the good answer, but it's always just been, when you're on stage, it's for them. Focus on it, giving to the people, but what about what music and performing music can do for yourself?
Well, it must do something for you. Otherwise you wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is, as you said earlier, creating your legacy, creating your thumbprint in this world that you were here.
Yes. And thankfully, it's been much easier to do that as years have gone on, like in terms of like society is much more accepting of a lot of the things I struggled with even 13 years ago. Well, not even 10 years ago, to be honest. But yeah.
Are you comfortable with the term iconoclast?
I like the word. I think it's an interesting concept. In terms of, it comes from of course, the word iconic. I mean, that's where the word iconic comes from. I think, are you asking me if that's what I think I am?
I'm asking you, I could imagine you being described in that way from the breadth of the work that you do, from the different genres of music, the different art forms. I mean, you may be writing lyrics to operas and to musicals and to songs, but you're still writing. So it's a skill set. It's another form of artistic expression. So again, you have created a space for yourself that is not easily definable or easily categorized.
Yes.
So the word iconoclast came to mind.
And remind me what the official definition of that is. Would you mind?
Let's pull it up.
Let's pull it up.
We're gonna pull.
I know it.
I'm gonna give you the Webster Dictionary version.
Oh, we like Webster.
A person who attacks cherished beliefs or institutions, a destroyer of images used in religious worship. That's
me. Destroyer of images, and yeah, that's me.
But I think in terms of that, it's really a person who breaks molds, a person who is not easily defined by a specific category, but can exist in many different
that's me.
Lanes.
Yeah. I think we talked about this even briefly before, but that's something I really have been getting more comfortable with telling myself and realizing. And I mean, I'm the first Black person to graduate from the Performing Arts High School here in Austin. As far as I know, one of the only young Black opera singers to come out of this city, as far as I know. I'm also the youngest librettist in the residency that I'm in. And, I've always had to just sort of create my own space. And I've always felt like I've just been sort of dropped in a place where I didn't belong. And therefore I had to create my own space within that space. And I resented my parents, of course, for that. Still do every now and then, but I really do also thank them because it really made me have to think in a really dissimilar way in terms of how to become myself.
What part of your life at this point, what step in your life requires you to take the biggest leap of faith?
I think I'm doing it now. I'm working full time as an artist now. And it continues to be a huge leap of faith that I'm sleeping every morning. I will say I'm grateful that I can work for the most part full time, but it is very scary, especially with this time. But I think I made that decision because I didn't want my art to suffer because I may be spread too thin with other responsibilities. And so I knew I would have to probably live more humbly, probably travel less, for the next 2 years, so that I can really put most of my energy into making sure that I can sing and make art at a level that doesn't require as much energy. If you're improvising and playing jazz, if you have done it so often, you don't even have to think about the changes or, it just comes out of you naturally. That's the level of art making that I want to get to, where it's beyond work. It's just an extension of who I am.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You said that around the age of 13 or 14, early teens is when you really stepped into understanding of your musicality. Mm-hmm. And it was nurtured specifically starting around that point. What would you now, looking back 10, 12 years, say to that person back then as they were starting out?
Take piano lessons. Don't stop. And what would I say to my childhood self, essentially? Right?
Yes.
Gosh. Well, I would probably just encourage him and say that I'm different for a reason, because I have I've been sent here to do different things. My path is different. And I would just remind my younger self of that. But honestly, from the age of 5 or 6, I've been, writing plays by hand in my room and things like that, and recording little radio shows with my sister on cassettes with puppets and things like that. I've always sort of been just immersed in my own world. And I would really just encourage myself to like go even further with that. So that by the time I'm an adult, all of those, that's just, my imagination is just so developed and full. Yeah.
Go further. That's a great lesson for all of us. Joshua, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I appreciate your honesty and your willingness just to share your heart with us. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being so intentional with these questions and being so curious as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, to those of you who are watching and listening, remember, we all have a voice, so use yours wisely. Bye.